Right now we have Michele Colopy, who is one of my favorite people. She's so funny. She's the program director for the Pollinator Stewardship Council. And this council is a very important regulatory agency that helps to affect the processes of pesticide risk assessment, label, and enforcement. And as somebody who has 3 beehives with a neighbor who uses True Green, which means that I stand out there like this, watching the guy spray everything to make sure he's doing it right, or I'll take a picture of him. Michele provides advocacy, guidance, and tools to document the detrimental effects of pesticides on pollinators. She works closely with state beekeeper associations throughout the country, the American Honey Producers Association, and the American Beekeeping Federation, and the National Honeybee Advisory Board. And in this capacity, she attempts to coordinate efforts across the bee industry. Michele has more than 17 years of experience in a variety of nonprofit organizations. She holds a master's degree in nonprofit management from the University of Akron, and she also manages her own bees in the city of Akron. Michele Colopy.
So good afternoon, everybody. We'll try to stay on schedule now. So I'm going to talk about raising awareness about the impact of pesticides on pollinators. So it's a lot of information I'm going to share with you, so if anyone does like to take pictures of slides for the information, get your cameras out, your cell phone cameras, because I'm going to share a lot of information in a short amount of time. So certainly at the Pollinator Stewardship Council, we are an organization, a nonprofit of beekeepers, started by beekeepers to work with beekeepers as well as our other agricultural stakeholders, whether it's gardeners, farmers, regulators, state departments of ag, anyone related to agriculture and basically the impact of pollinators upon those plants and our ecosystem. So our focus certainly is the impact of pesticides on pollinators. We realize farmers need to protect their crops, but beekeepers have a right to keep their bees, their livestock, alive as well. They need to be able to and have a right to protect those bees from the impact of pesticides. But what is interesting about pesticides is most of us have had them in our lives forever. We can't remember a time without pesticides. They were developed certainly after the war, World War I starting, because it was a munition in a sense. It was a tool of war, but then we reduced some of the toxic effects so we could kill pests with them. But pesticides do not increase crop yield. And you will often hear pesticide salespeople saying, without pesticides, we will not be able to feed ourselves, we won't have crop yield. Crop yield happens because of pollination, whether it's wind pollination, self-pollination, rain pollination, or insect pollination. Without that pollination, you will not have crops. You won't have the little berries, seeds, vegetables, nuts, without pollination. So pesticides simply conserve losses. Pesticides do not pollinate. Pesticides just conserve losses. So value of pollination in this country, we have started putting an economic value to it, and people forget about this free ecosystem service, and some of the other speakers have talked about the ecosystem service of our pollinators, of our environment, and it is a free service that our native pollinators provide, but because so much of our world is devoid now of native pollinators, we are paying beekeepers to come in to pollinate our crops. So it has a value to those crops. And for the pollinator-dependent crops, it's more than $12 billion that honeybees contribute to those crops. For the indirectly dependent crops, it's $6.8 billion, because not all the crops are 100% reliant on bees, but if you can have bees, say in soybeans, you can increase your crop yield of soybeans from anywhere 5 to almost 20%. But soybeans do not need bees to pollinate them, but if you let the bees pollinate them and you let those bees live while they're pollinating, they will actually increase crop yield. So that even with the other insects, and those are our native pollinators, they are increasing crop yield as well to the dependent and the indirectly dependent crops. And we have to keep in mind especially our native pollinators are pollinating our wildlands, and that's the food for our wildlife to eat. So we need our native pollinators to help sustain our native plants, because honeybees are old world bees. They're European bees. They came over here with the Pilgrims. Our native pollinators support our native plants. Now, there have been surveys done the past almost 10 years. This one's from Bee Informed Partnership that talks about honeybee losses. We've all heard about colony collapse disorder, which is a wonderful marketing tool for the media, really. But colony collapse disorder is not caused by one thing, and it's really a misnomer, and it's misleading. Our honeybees are suffering from pests, pathogens, pesticides, and poor forage. Now, talking about the 4 Ps, doesn't seem to make the media happy, so they like colony collapse disorder. But it is certainly causing major issues with the honeybees, and you can see the losses in the different states through this voluntary survey. Typically, beekeepers will lose 10 to 15% every year simply because of winter. Winter, cold, snow, times when the bees can't get out of their hives to fly around. Winter, typically, historically, 10 to 15% of bees. But when we get states like even in Ohio, 49% of our bees lost, that's not sustainable beekeeping. And there are other things obviously going on in the bees' environment. So we need to research that. We need to look into that. Now, certainly when we look at how we deal with weeds and many of the wildflowers that the other speakers have talked about, we've all known them as weeds. They aren't weeds, they're wildflowers. So we have to change our understanding of them. Sadly, milkweed has the word weed at the end, and people have been ripping it out, and people have been spraying it with glyphosate. But it is a necessary food source for certainly the monarch butterflies. And if you look at the map where we have applied glyphosate, and then you look at the migratory route of the monarch, that's why the monarch is suffering. We are wiping out their habitat because we don't like weeds. Weeds are wildflowers. Weeds are good. Weeds prevent soil erosion. Weeds are food for other creatures. They are habitat for other beneficial insects. So we have to change our mindset about what a weed is. Sometimes a flower can be a weed if it's just growing in the wrong place, but guess what? It grows best there. So you need to change your mindset because, all things have a right to live, and there's a reason it's growing there, and it might not be a weed to something else. It is habitat. It is a food source. So that the real world of our honeybees, it's not just one thing. It is not just pesticides impacting it. It is certainly the lack of forage. We've talked about grassy yards. There is no food there whatsoever for any pollinator at all. Grassy yards don't feed anything. If you know anything about the soil and water conservation districts and some other conversations from speakers this morning, there's far too much water runoff from grassy yards. It really is a waste of space. That typically and historically in this country, if you had a grassy yard, you were of the wealthy class and you had servants or slaves. That's how we got grass. Because otherwise, if you owned land, it had to be productive. You either had grazing animals on it or you grew food on it. You did not have a grassy, useless, wasted space like this. So we have just gotten used to these grassy yards. We've gotten just moved into that as our suburbs expanded after World War II and people didn't have to raise food in their backyards. We wanted to get rid of the victory gardens because the war was done, but it was healthier food when we all had victory gardens. So that when we look at these grassy yards, we have to again change our mindset that we need to have productive land, healthy land for the entire ecosystem, even in the cities. But when we look at the other impacts, certainly on honeybees, we have the varroa mite, which is a major pest. We have pathogens of bees. But every living creature has pests and pathogens. They have since the beginning of time. We have pests and pathogens that attack us. But every creature can develop ways to manage that, just like we do. But when we throw in things of lack of food and then pesticide exposure, then that weakens the immune system just like it would weaken our immune system. If you stay up for a couple of nights in a row, you're just eating Twinkies, and you're around small children who usually have lots of diseases, you will get sick. You can tell I have no children. I think of them as walking bags of germs. So, But it's, they are just developing their immune system. So they get all of these diseases in order to strengthen their immune system. But for us, when we're kind of past some of those things, if we stress our immune system, then we get sick faster. And that's what's happening to our bees. We are stressing them beyond them being able to deal with the pests and pathogens, and we're throwing in pesticides and not enough good quality natural forage. And this is why the bees are suffering. So when we look at certainly apples, plums, and cherries, we all like apples, plums, and cherries. It's good, delicious, nutritious fruit, and our bees have to pollinate them. Well, if you're in California, where they actually register the pesticides that are used on the different crops, and it's the only state in the union that does, you can find out what pesticides are used, and those that are in red are bee toxic pesticides. So that's the list for apples. There we have some for plums, and then we have them for cherries. Now, if your bees are pollinating all three of those crops, your bees are encountering all of those bee toxic pesticides and all of those other pesticides. Now, pesticides, too, you want to remember, actually encompass herbicides, fungicides, and insecticides. All three of those are pesticides. So the pesticide word is used to encompass herbicide, fungicide, and insecticide. And all of them, when they mix together, will make their own chemistries. They do not stay separate in a tank mix, and no farmer ever applies one pesticide at a time. That would not be cost efficient for them. That would not be an effective use of their resources. So they will mix a lot of these things together. Rather like your 5-year-old when they open up the kitchen cupboard under the sink and they pull out all those household chemicals and they start mixing things together. And you're hoping you don't walk out in the kitchen and something is smoking because they've mixed the wrong things together. But this is what will happen in agriculture, is they will mix a variety of the chemicals together because that is a typical farming practice. So that when research is done on the hive products, whether it's the beeswax, the pollen, the nectar, they are finding in, you can see the study of 259 wax and 350 pollen samples, that they find plenty of pesticides that linger in these hives. That just because you spray a pesticide on a plant doesn't mean it stays there. It travels on the wind, it can travel through the soil, it can travel through the water. So these pesticides are finding their way into the hives because our bees are little flying dust mops. So if something is blowing on the wind, they pick it up on their bodies because they have an electrostatic charge and they pick up everything they fly through. But they also bring it back into the hive through pesticides sprayed on plants, that they pick up the pollen, and if a fungicide was sprayed on the pollen, they're bringing that fungicide back to the hive in the pollen. And then those pesticides linger in the hives, starting to create their own synergism. Pesticides typically break down in sunlight. And when you take pesticides back to a warm, dark, moist hive, they're going to stay toxic for a long time. So some of the research is showing that infections of bees, a typical disease called nosema, will result when there are higher fungicide loads in the pollen. And again, when a bee brings back pollen that has a fungicide on it, in that nice dark environment, the fungicide does not decay, so it's still active. And that the pollen fed to the house bees, fed to the baby bees, in a sense, the larvae, will kill them. Now, neonicotinoid pesticides are the poster child of pesticides right now. It is a labeled bee toxic pesticide. It clearly says on the label it is toxic. The thing about neonicotinoids is the pesticide label will not say that word because that's a class of pesticide. The neonics are imidacloprid, they're thiamethoxam, it's dinotefuran. So you have to learn to read these pesticide labels and ask, what is the active ingredient? You have to look on the label and see what the active ingredient is. And the active ingredient will be the first thing listed, and it might say it's at 20% of the entire bottle, or it's 98%, and the other 50 to 2% is other ingredients. And they never tell you what the other ingredients are. Sometimes they just describe them as inert ingredients, and we're finding they're not so inert. They're kind of ert. So it becomes a problem then, again, when these products are mixed with other chemicals, when they are, the bees are exposed to them either on a sublethal or a lethal dose, because these things will, again, linger in the hives and can affect the lifespan of a hive. So that you can see that the neonics, some of the recent studies are showing that it's restricting the development of royal jelly that is then fed to the queen. It's also, these products are fed to the larvae. So it's jeopardizing the normal development of honeybees. In a sense, baby bees, for those of you who don't like the word larvae, because it sounds icky. But that is how the bees reproduce. So if we are affecting them at the reproduction end, this is why our colonies then collapse later. Because you have to constantly have a cycle of new populations coming into the beehive in order to sustain the organism called a beehive. Now our pesticides, again, when I was saying that they don't stay in one place, the EPA says that drift really doesn't happen, even though it does, but it doesn't. Because they've changed the definition of drift as it pertains to pesticides. All of us understand what drift is. You know, whether it's something you pour on the floor and it drifts across the floor, or you throw, some dust in the air and it catches on the wind and it drifts. We understand drift. EPA says, no. So that they define drift in a different way, and they try to control drift based on how the pesticide is applied. Typically, pesticides aren't supposed to be applied above 10 miles per hour. Okay. But that isn't always controlled. So certainly, again, this is how our pesticides travel through the water into other plants, into our wells in our homes. It's, if you live in the rural areas and you have a well. But this is, again, how the contamination continues when we misuse pesticides. I know Jennifer was talking about herbicide use, and she truly tried to mention, read the label, use it per the directions. Far too many people think if you buy a gallon of, I refer to it as glyphosate because I don't like to talk in brand names, but that is typically Roundup. But if you buy a gallon of it, it does not mean you should use the entire gallon. The directions will typically say ounces. You take ounces of the Roundup and mix it with a gallon or more of water, but you must read the directions because that is key. Otherwise, you're misusing the product. And if you misuse a pesticide, you have broken federal law. So if you misuse a pesticide and someone gets harmed by that, you have broken federal law. And it would sadly, though, have to be the victim who sues you because you misused the product. But again, those federal labels are protected by law, and you've got to read the directions. You can use glyphosate safely, as Ohio Prairie Nursery does, and I know I've had conversations with Bob about that, but you must read the directions. You've got to read the directions. You can use it wisely, but you've got to read the directions. And don't think more is better. With pesticides, more is not better. Again, the label defines how much to use so you will not kill the wrong plants, that it won't stay in your soil too long, so you must read the label and follow the directions, and I know humans don't like to do that. That is the weakness of these pesticide labels. It is humans. Because there's actually a Seinfeld joke that I heard the other day that he was talking, people don't read the labels on how to use a drill, they don't read them on how to, none of us read the label on opening up our computers and how to operate them. But boy, if you've got dry cleaning and something says dry clean only, everybody freaks out because, that has to be dry cleaned. You can't put that in the washer. It seems to be the only label we read. We need to read all the labels, especially for pesticides. These are toxic chemicals that can cause problems in the water and to beneficial insects, to your pets on the lawn, to you. So read the labels. Because again, as I was saying, water can contain these pesticides, and there have been studies out of the Corn Belt showing that after corn planting happens, and it's not the corn seed that's the problem, it is the pesticides coating the corn seed. That we have, for about the past 10 years, started applying pesticides to different seeds, corn and soy, and it's supposed to protect the plant from pests. However, much of this pesticide chips off the seed, and if it chips off the seed while it's being planted, it gets caught up in the dust while the planting is going on. It blows on the wind, and that dust laced with pesticide can land on either water sources or a plant in bloom, and it will kill bees. because the pesticides coating corn seed and soy are neonicotinoids, and they are bee toxic pesticides. So this is where you will often hear about bees being killed because of corn planting. It's not that the corn seed is a problem, it's the pesticides coated on the corn seed. But again, even as the corn is planted, if there are some heavy rains afterwards, it washes all those neonics right down into the river systems. And then the bees drink water. People forget bees drink water. So if you have a bird bath, change it every day. Your bees want clean water. But that's, and they will come to your bird bath for clean water. Our bees are lazy. They're opportunistic like all of us. So they're going to go to the easy water source. So most beekeepers try to be good neighbors and put out a water source near their bees, but we can't control our girls. They will always go where it causes problems for us, usually our neighbor's pool. But they need water too. So when you have these pesticide combinations of either pesticides on the water, mixes of pesticides as farmers apply them, or homeowners, or your city, this is what is causing problems for our bees. So we can help the health of our bees by decreasing our pesticide exposure. And I know a lot of the speakers before me were talking about planting habitat that was pesticide-free. Our bees need pesticide-free food, and they need quality, natural pollen and nectar. So that means habitat without pesticides. But you want to make sure the soil you're planting in doesn't have pesticides, because pesticides like neonicotinoids are systemic, and they can translocate through the soil into the plant and be exuded through the pollen and nectar. And sometimes those neonics have a half-life of up to 3 years. So if you were using a lawn care service for a number of years and you now want to plant a meadow, like you've seen many of those examples, have your soil tested. Talk to the extension, local extension folks in your area, and see if you can get your soil tested to find out what's in there. Now in Northeast Ohio, first off, we'll find a lot of lead. We're going to find a lot of lead in our soil from gasoline and lead paint. But if you've been using a lawn care service, it might have a lot of other chemicals, and you don't want to plant a killing field for your pollinators. Because again, when we look at our pesticides, it's not about acute kills. Much of this is about sublethal kills. And when we examine the life cycle of a beehive, we cannot just think okay, I've killed the adult foragers. Okay, but if you kill the adult foragers, you are damaging the life cycle of the hive, because every level of the bees, every caste within the beehive, has a job to do. So if you, say, damage the foragers, then you suddenly are moving up the guard bees to work too soon. I know it might seem, 3 days. Okay, well, if you're not living, past about 90 days, you can't be rushed in your job. But it just throws off the whole work process and the organism called the hive if you suddenly just wipe out the acute, wipe out the adult foragers, and everybody else has to move up. And if you wipe out a couple of levels, say up to the group that produces wax and constructs the comb, you have really set the hive back. So these sublethal effects of the pesticides can cause a slow dwindling, again, wiping out a lot of the population of the hive. Acute kills do certainly the dramatic damage, and sometimes the hive can recover from an acute kill if it's just of the adult foragers, but you're still causing major stress on that hive, and it might not be able to come back, and it's simply because of a pesticide exposure. So think about what you're doing when you use a pesticide. And and I know Denise will probably tell you too, if you go out in your garden and you find little bites out of your leaves, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a pest. It might be leafcutter bees. It might be the native bees who chew out little sections of the leaves because they're making a nest and they're laying an egg. And it's not damaging your plant so much. We have to get past this cosmetic view of, I want it to look perfectly formed. Well, actually, a perfectly formed plant is one where the ecosystem is balanced and has some leafcutters chewing on your plants. So when we look at our insects, not every insect is bad. Again, it's rather like weeds. We have to change our mindset. Only 5% of our insects are harmful to humans and crops. The rest are beneficials. They eat each other. So let's be nicer to our bugs. They're at the bottom of the food chain. If we lose them, we move down in the food chain. We need this balance in our ecosystem. You need it for a healthy garden. You need it for a healthy habitat. So when we hear those folks saying we have to have pesticides or we won't be able to feed the world, we're feeding the world now. We're throwing away too much food. So don't let the fear mongers make you feel like we've got to have all these pesticides. All of us are here today. Our ancestors, even before the 1900s, did not have all these pesticides. And they fed themselves. They had droughts. Certainly people were starving, but it was also because they didn't have the land on which to grow food or the money to buy it. But we are feeding the world now. So I'm just going to kind of flip through this just to give you an exposure about pesticides. That EPA registers pesticides. They get all of their data about that pesticide product from the manufacturer, because law says the manufacturer has to submit all the information. But the research will clearly say if something is bee toxic. Again, the label will tell you if it's harmful to bees. For those pesticides we know that will be used around bees. Those pesticides like fungicides are never tested on bees because it's meant to kill a fungus. But we're finding they're killing bees as well. But for this one, cyantraniliprole, it is obviously highly toxic to bees, causes abnormal behavior in bees, impairs their locomotion, and it even degrades into products that are harmful to bees, and cyantraniliprole hangs out in the pollen, the honey, and the wax. Gee, not a good thing. However, you can comment anytime a pesticide is reviewed. We do a public comment at EPA. Certainly we in the bee industry comment on those things. Doesn't mean it always stops the process. Sometimes they will change the label to try and mitigate the risk. But cyantraniliprole is not just used on a few things. So kind of look at that list. It's used on many, many things. And when a pesticide is registered, EPA also determines the tolerance for the residues in our food, in animal products. It sets a residue level of how much of that pesticide can remain in the food, on the food, or in the animal. And yes, it's parts per million or parts per billion, but this is one option. Think about how much of this you eat across your entire life. So you've got the tolerance uses. Look at this. It's in fruiting vegetables, the different animal meats. It's amazing how this one pesticide travels throughout the ecosystem to things that either eat the grasses and things that it's fed on, or used on crops like potato, and there's the level for wet peel of a potato. So EPA does this for every pesticide out there, and we have about 80,000 different pesticides in our environment at this time that are registered. So, but while EPA ignores the fact, well, they changed their viewpoint of what drift is, they do acknowledge there are indirect or inadvertent exposures of a pesticide. So cyantraniliprole is not used directly on these things, but they know that it's going to get there. So they set inadvertent or indirect tolerances of the pesticide residue on these other things. I guess it was best I didn't do this talk during lunch. So certainly there are lists. We know which ones are toxic to pesticides or toxic to bees. Purdue has a list. I believe OSU has a list. And you can find out, this one at Purdue does list the brand name as well as the active ingredient. Again, I don't talk in brand names. I talk in active ingredients. But the information is there, but you have to read the label. You have to read the label. If you're going to protect your bees, if you're going to plant a pollinator habitat, you want to protect them then. You don't want suddenly the mosquito truck coming down your street, spraying your front yard for mosquitoes, and then all your pollinators drop dead. Because the majority of products used for mosquitoes are all toxic to bees. And you can see the half-life of some of them, depending on how they are used. Typically, sunlight will break them down fairly quickly. But again, if this stuff would land on water and you don't dump the water, then you've just made a toxic environment for your bees. So certainly, this is what happens from acute kills of bees from pesticides. No beekeeper wants to go out and find this, and I know there's one or two beekeepers in here who have discovered this, and it's heart-wrenching to go out to your hive and you find this acute kill. And typically, you'll find 1 or 2 inches of dead bees inside the hive. And it's anywhere from $350 to $500 to replace a hive. But if you have 1,300 hives, that's a lot of money. that's someone's major livelihood. So we encourage folks to report bee kills, and actually all of you as gardeners should report pesticide incidents. I had a woman in Kentucky who they were spraying the roadside. She wanted them to stop spraying with an herbicide and some other mix. She was in a rural area at the end of a dead end. She was trying to get them to shut off the engine. She was just flagging them down, and these two guys in a truck didn't care. They ended up spraying her with the herbicide as she was yelling at them, and then started swearing at them, I believe. They got her right in the mouth with the herbicide. She ended up at the emergency room, and I only knew about this because I talked to her bee club 6 months after the fact. She never turned this in as a pesticide incident report to the state or to EPA. So, even if you've got friends who are, say, out running on a country road and they accidentally get sprayed, or maybe stupidly and intentionally get sprayed by an herbicide, they need to report that, because that's illegal and that's a misuse of the pesticide. We cannot just sit idly by and go, well, someone should know or someone should do something about it. All of us have to be that someone, because pesticides should be used per the label legally, and certainly not on people. The people do report their bee kills to us. The states in yellow are reported bee kills to us. We try to facilitate that and get people to report them to their state and to the EPA. But we need this data of what's going on and how people really use pesticides, because we know they don't read labels. Because these labels clearly say this product is highly toxic to bees exposed to direct treatment on blooming crops or weeds. It's under the environmental hazard section. The problem with mosquito control products is they are allowed a public health exemption, which is right there, to prevent or control a threat to public or animal health. So when there's a public health exemption, that means they can spray it wherever and however they want to. They can violate the label directions because it's to control for, in our case, West Nile virus in mosquitoes, or even Zika. The problem with the two mosquitoes now, Zika carrying mosquitoes fly during the daytime when our bees are out, and West Nile virus mosquitoes fly at nighttime when our bees are in. So you can work to protect pollinators and protect public health, but beekeepers have got to be motivated, taxpayers have got to be motivated to talk to our mosquito control districts, because all three of those pictures are wrong applications of mosquito control. Certainly you can spray a larvicide on this water source, but why not mitigate the water source? Because 1,000 mosquito eggs can breed in a cup of water. So why are we not draining that ditch? Because let's get rid of the mosquito habitat. Instead, you're going to have to spray that ditch every 3 days. Well, that's just a silly and waste of money. In this one, if you do have some blooming weeds there, which yes, weeds can be a mosquito habitat, then mow it. Otherwise, you'll again have to spray that every 3 days. So mow it. You have a guy driving down the side of the road, standing outside of his truck, just driving it. So why not have somebody on a mower? We have to look at these other solutions in this lazy way of, oh, just spray it. Because there are better, healthier ways for our ecosystem. And this one, again, spraying in the middle of the day, if it's for West Nile virus, you're just killing bees, you're not killing mosquitoes at all. So it's a waste of our money. So when we look at mosquito control, it comes down to us, just like planting pollinator habitat. And it's easy for all of us to destroy Mother Nature. Boy, is it easy for us to destroy that. But it's really hard work to put it back, as the other speakers have talked about planting their yards. So it takes a lot, but we need to clean up around our houses and get rid of mosquito habitat and put in pollinator habitat. So clean up that standing water. Make sure your toys outside are not holding water, because again, a cup of water holds 1,000 mosquito eggs. So clean up around your house. You don't want to be an episode of hoarders, because those people are breeding a lot of pests. So clean up around your house. Make sure your gutters drain, because mosquitoes typically will feed within about 300 feet to about a mile of their breeding ground. So if you've got problem mosquitoes in your neck of the woods, it's your own fault. You and your neighbors, you're breeding them. So if we want to use less pesticides, clean up the mosquito habitat, and talk to your mosquito control districts and make sure for West Nile virus mosquitoes they're spraying after dark, D-A-R-K, when those mosquitoes are feasting on the birds in the trees. Not twilight, not sunset, not when the street lights come on. That's not dark. It's dark, D-A-R-K, dark. We all know what dark is. They haven't changed the definition of dark. So this is just to give an idea of people. This is what happens to bees. When a nerve agent is sprayed on bees, imidacloprid was sprayed on bees. This beekeeper lost 1,300 hives. He was across the field in an abandoned gravel pit, and the bees were feasting on willow blossoms, but corn was planted the day before across the road. 1,300 hives. That was half of his operation as a commercial beekeeper. So read those labels, but do keep in mind the labels are sometimes not necessarily helpful, because sadly there's some wrong information on them. Certainly with bee toxic pesticides, don't apply it when the crop is in bloom, when the plant is in bloom. But when you have exceptions, some of these exceptions are flat out wrong, because bees will fly at temperatures less than 55 degrees. You ask any beekeeper in here and they'll say, yeah, my bees are out there sometimes at 42 degrees. And the native bees especially, they're hardier, they have more fuzz. They've got some little warm coats on, so they can fly at temperatures. So that's an incorrect unless, an incorrect exemption. You also have this exemption if there's an active state apiary registry program. Well, we have one in Ohio. Ooh. It does not notify beekeepers. A beekeeper can be notified of a pesticide application if you're registered under the Ohio Sensitive Crop Registry, but it's all voluntary. It's voluntary for the applicator to contact you, it's voluntary for the farmer to contact you. And mosquito spray districts don't contact anybody. They don't have to by law. So you have an unreasonable mitigation measure for beekeepers to move their bees. And if you've never been around a beehive, they can be kind of heavy to pick up and move. And then where are you supposed to move them? Where they will be safe. So we need to work together to understand how farmers need to protect their crops. And if they are looking at an imminent threat, which might affect their economic threshold, the problem with this is nobody's proving that to anyone else. So we have still problems with the pesticide label, and it still is not protecting bees. So I'm going to flip through a couple of these because I think my time's running out. So of how we can work together to protect bees, certainly it's going back to integrated pest management, and for all of you gardeners in there, pesticides are not the be-all and end-all. This is true integrated pest management, where chemical controls are just 1/10 of the process. Gardening and farming is hard work. Now, I'm a lazy gardener because I know how hard the work is. So it is hard work. We cannot just say, oh, I'll spray something. Gardening is not supposed to be easy. And I think most of the master gardeners in here will agree. Gardening is not easy if you do it the right way, a sustainable way. So that we can work together to protect our pollinators, to reduce our pesticide use, and most importantly, to reduce the habitat of pests such as mosquitoes. But we have to get rid of their habitat. So when you have a healthy pollinator habitat, that's not a mosquito habitat, because pollinators welcome a lot of the beneficials that are predators of mosquitoes. So we have here in Ohio, and Denise mentioned it briefly about the state pollinator plan we're working on. Certainly there are some hopes for those, and we are working with that as well. But it is about everybody coming together and talking about how we can solve these issues. And it will take all of us working together to reduce our pesticide use, put in pollinator habitat, and ensure that we have healthy honeybees. We cannot just rely on one group of the stakeholders to move their bees, because nobody's managing the native bees and nobody's telling them to move. So we want to protect our bees, we want to take action to protect our balanced ecosystem. And we can do that by working with groups like mine, where we can respond to the government when they want to put out another pesticide that's bee toxic. We can, certainly one of the things we did was we got one product, the registration vacated and remanded. It was called sulfoxaflor, but sadly it's now gotten re-registered at a lower active ingredient rate, and they're restricting it to use on products that are not necessarily pollinator attractive, or use on the product after the bloom is done. Not sure how that's going to work. But at the same time, we had some research that came out that said products like sulfoxaflor are one of the second highest threats to pollinator health, and yet EPA just re-registered sulfoxaflor. So it takes all of us to pay attention to these things because it's our food supply, it's our wildlands, it's our parks. We need our pollinators to maintain this extra quality of life. And you can learn about the different plants. I know OSU Bee Lab has a list. You can also go to Honeybee Net through NASA, and they have a nice list for Ohio of different pollinator attractive plants. So that all of us as gardeners, as stakeholders, as food consumers need to be the example as well as plant habitat. This is my yard. Again, I'm a lazy gardener, so I did it from seed. I did the solarization technique to kill the grass in my yard. I just scattered the seeds. I watched them grow. I'm on my 3rd year. And my neighbors have no problem, and I don't really care if they do. Because it's my yard. So, and I make a point of sweeping up my seeds on the sidewalk and throwing them back into my yard. The only time, now I do mow it in the fall simply because I want the seeds to fall in my yard, not blow down the street, and that way the snow can pull all those seeds down into my yard. But I do not water this. I watered it the first 10 days when I laid down the seed just to make sure the seed stayed put. I did not till my yard. The other speakers were correct. Do not till, especially a crappy front yard in a city. Because they are crappy yards because they are our basements. So it's really crappy soil. Somebody else said you'll run into gravel. So, but my soil now holds onto the water because it has so many roots in there from all these flowers. So I don't need to water. And I don't have time. And Mother Nature has to take care of itself. So my flowers move, they're growing where they want to. I don't care. I'm not here to control nature. I'm here to let nature have its way with my front yard. And it is. So, and I wait until the last frost, I mow it down. But I'm not mowing anymore. Certainly I'm providing diverse food for the native pollinators as well as my own honeybees. I've reduced my carbon emissions. My stormwater runoff is reduced greatly. I used to have puddles of water in my sidewalk. I don't anymore. My yard absorbs all of it. So it's a wonderful, and I am the example to others, whether it's other beekeepers or my neighbors. Look, you can do this too, and the world still turns. I don't have a grassy front yard, and it's okay. Now, in my yard, though, and I know somebody talked about city restrictions, in my city, grass can't be more than 8 inches tall, so I planted no grass seed in that mix. It's all flowers. Because the grasses will take over too fast. So it's all flower seeds in there, no grasses. And it works, and I am legal. It can be done. The world will continue to turn, and you'll have wonderful flowers. We can do things like looking at the national strategy to promote pollinator health. We have to work with our departments of transportation, we have to work with our extension agents, and make these things happen. Because we do know that pollinators are suffering, and there are some suggestions, some guidelines out there, but it takes all of us to be involved. There are groups like the Honeybee Health Coalition, you can get some of these things on my website, that if you need to educate your neighbors about pollinators, it's some nice information about what's going on with honeybees and how we can help their health. Certainly there are some things for beekeepers and for growers through the Honeybee Health Coalition. We have a little film that talks about a job swap between a farmer, a pesticide applicator, and a beekeeper. So that's kind of a nice thing to learn about. And certainly we here in Ohio are trying to do things. We've planted 33 acres of habitat, working with some corporations and some beekeeping groups. We've done some research at Pollinator Stewardship Council, working with commercial beekeepers. And then certainly we have actually made this partnership with Scott's Miracle-Gro, and they're going to take 3 of the neonics out of their products. And we are going to work with them to educate consumers how to use pesticides. So we can work with the pesticide companies to make change, because they realized they had to make change. There was someone who's talked about Maryland and how they're reducing neonics in the Chesapeake Bay area. They have to, because it's not just affecting bees, it's affecting the aquatic life. So companies like Scott's are realizing this. So certainly we go around the country talking about bees and the impact of pesticides, and whoops, you were trying to take a picture, okay. Certainly we are a membership organization. You can join us and help support our work. And we can certainly all work together to help our pollinators, reducing pesticide use, planting for pollinators. That's what this whole symposium is about today. We've got to all look at changing the environment in which we live. And yes, that will be hard work. Again, it's really easy to kill Mother Nature. It's hard work to resuscitate her and put it back in place. But it can be done. We can certainly support and collaborate and advocate for our pollinators and for a healthy ecosystem. Okay, so thank you very much. I appreciate the time.